This is a podcast where we talk about bodies, culture, power, and all the weird little ways society tries to tell us who deserves ease. I'm Darren Harriott, and today's guest is someone who has been thinking deeply and publicly about weight stigma long before the current GLP-1 gold rush made everybody suddenly very chatty about body politics. Virgie Tovar is an author, speaker, and leading voice on anti-fat bias, whose work has asked a deceptively simple question. If thinness is being sold as freedom, freedom for whom and at what cost? Today, we'll be talking GLP-1s, fat phobia, recovery, media narratives, and the difference between body autonomy and a culture that quietly rewards self-erasure. Yeah. Hello, Virgie. How's it going?
It's so good. Hi, Darren.
Thank you so much for doing the podcast. Before we get into the whole GLP-1 situation, could you sketch the bigger arc of your work and what first pushed you toward writing and speaking about weight stigma?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny going back to thinking about GLP-1s. I think there was absolutely a point in my life where I would have happily taken GLP-1s and not even read the fine print. Just gimme, I'll get it however I can. You know, I mean, I grew up, I like to tell people that I come from an intergenerational fat family. I have fat grandparents, great grandparents, my parents, and we've all experienced weight stigma. But it's interesting because that's not how it's understood when you come from a fat family. It's understood as we all have this struggle and we all have to try and overcome it, you know? Which is so interesting when I think about, like, I'm also from a Latin family, and that's not how we understood Latinness, you know? But anyway, so yeah, I didn't experience fat shaming as a kid in my home, but once I got into school, it was very quickly there and very brutal and really, really began to shape my life very early on at maybe age 5. You know, I had the regular experience, I think, unfortunately, of being a fat kid, which is you get teased and brutalized and it's very upsetting and traumatic. And then eventually you kind of cave. You kind of give in and you realize you're not going to win. You realize that the pressure is so ubiquitous and so intense and relentless that you're not going to win and you have to kind of give in. And it's interesting, right? Like unearthing in therapy, that moment for me at maybe age, 8 or 9, where I hit that breaking point where I just kind of gave in and I started to hate my own body and I started to try to have a thin body. And this did not, that process of trying to have a thin body, trying to like have the quote unquote right body lasted for a long time, like years and years and years, ultimately developing anorexia, which no one noticed because when you're a fat kid and you're losing weight really rapidly, it's just like, great, whatever you're doing, just keep doing it. No questions asked. And so I was developing anorexia really clearly. And I think all the signs were there, but no one was looking for them in me. Or I think another way to put it is anorexia in a fat person is considered positive, which I think is really hard to hear and hard to accept. But it's kind of like, it's like whatever you have to do to not be fat, we're not even going to ask questions. Just keep doing it because we think it's so whatever, the ends justify the means. You have a blank check, basically. And I don't know, I mean, I want to also say in the US at least, the diagnostic criteria for anorexia is still you have to be underweight, female, and white, basically, in order to even be on the radar of a doctor to screen you for those things. So there's a lot of complicated parts of that too. So by the time I'm 20 years old, I've been now dieting for maybe 15 years or something a long time. And I'm already starting to show the signs of long-term food restriction, like, losing your equilibrium, getting scurvy, things that are now part of GLP-1 life, for a lot of people, we're very much, I know that reality. And then anyway, kind of some things happen in the meantime. My body really gets tired of living like this. And I eventually end up in graduate school at age 29. And I can access this anger that I feel around the fat phobia I've experienced, but I don't really have language exactly. And then I go to graduate school and I end up studying weight stigma I end up researching how does weight stigma affect women's lives and how does it affect how we present, how we do gender, how we perform gender, things like that. And that led me down this extraordinary rabbit hole, both intellectually, politically, and I think kind of spiritually, where I ended up learning about fat activism, which is a form of activism in the United States. It's been around since the late 1960s. And it completely transformed my life. It really changed the question from how can you become the right kind of person, which had been the question for most of my life.
Yeah.
And by right kind of person, I mean a thin person, to, have you considered there's nothing wrong with you? And that led down this massive life change. And that it kind of, I feel like everything stemmed from there. It was like I started researching this, and then all of a sudden I was kind of already in a public conversation, was getting invited to speak at universities and do some media interviews. And it's just been writing books and doing advocacy and training doctors, training public health professionals, since then.
Wow, you said so many things that really resonated with me. I mean, the one line you said, "Have you considered there's just nothing wrong with you?" is something that when I was struggling with my weight as a kid and dieting and starving myself, and all through my as young as like 5, 6, I remember having issues all the way to way into my 20s. I never asked that question once. Have you just thought like, there's nothing wrong with you? It never even came into my head. Just hearing you talk about how at home, there was no sort of weight issues with your family. You weren't bullied, or there was no jokes made or anything like that. Whereas I was the opposite. I had it with my family, and then that carried on with me through school. So I never really got it at school. I think it was just because I was quite big and quite intimidating. But in my head, I put it all on me that, like I wouldn't learn how to swim. I wouldn't get into a swimming pool because I didn't want to be topless, that sort of a thing. Gosh, you just said so many things that I was just sitting here and I just went, yeah, this is making so much sense to me. What have you been trying to get people to understand about anti-fat bias for years that you still think isn't quite landing?
Yeah. I mean, I guess the fundamental, like when I think about what's the mission, I think,
Mm,
you know, that every single person deserves to live a life of dignity, regardless of their body size and their health status. I think there are so many misunderstandings that happen in this conversation. And one of them is, I think that there is this idea that, okay, we can give people in larger bodies dignity as a society, but you have to be willing to hand over your blood work at any moment. Almost like it really is almost like forcing someone to show their ID. It's
yeah.
extremely invasive. I mean, I've had so many experiences where, I've had institutions ask me to speak or something, and they'll say, but you're going to have to review that you're healthy. Your blood work is that you're allowed to make these claims
Wow.
around humanitarianism
Wow.
because your blood work. And I have to tell them, this is not the standard of humanitarianism. The standard of humanitarianism is that this is an inalienable right, that
Mm.
it's not a contingent right, a caveated right. And so I think this is where things get really, you see kind of the mechanisms of fat phobia, and there's so many little working parts, right? I think one of the things that I really focus on when people are just newly learning about fat phobia are things like, okay, so it's one thing for you to say, I just hate fat people. This is an overt kind of fat phobia. I just don't like you. I don't want to be friends with you. I don't want to date you. I don't want you in my family photos. I don't want you in my event
Oh,
photos. And that's a very
gosh.
obvious form of fat phobia, a very obvious form of weight stigma, which we're still working through, even that. But then there's this softer, sort of more subtle form of fat phobia that is like, well, I don't hate you, but you definitely need to change. I don't hate you, but for your own health, you need to have a significantly different body. And
Wow.
so I think that people who are there don't understand that that is also stigma, that is also conditional humanitarianism. And I think fundamentally, people have a lot of discomfort around people in larger bodies. And the truth is, right, like as someone who has studied critical race theory, as someone who has studied sexism and feminism, it's not that different from any other form of stigma. We go back in time and women experience just being shamed in the street for being women. You think about the role of science and medicine in upholding stigma. And in the United States, you immediately have to go to the history of race science, where medicine is measuring people's skulls and saying that, people of color are just likelier to be criminal because of the size of their skull. So I think what's important to understand is fat phobia it is its own creature. It has its own complexities, but it builds entirely on every other form of stigma that has ever existed. And I think what's scary, and again, this is the part there's so many uncomfortable things about this conversation, but I think what's really challenging is when we look at weight stigma, we have to be open to looking at the history of medicine and the ways in which medicine has sometimes colluded in the perpetuation of stigma. Perhaps not intentionally, but yes.
Can I just jump back a little bit? I heard you mention it. You talked about was it training doctors?
Yeah, working with doctors, yeah.
Yeah. Can I ask, what was that like with with doctors? Because you'd feel like the way that doctors are generally taught how to teach people around, sort of weight stigma, it's always bad, 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 bad. So how was that for you?
Yeah, honestly, and I don't, again, I have to say, right, the medical schools that are calling me in are probably self-selecting. I don't know that I'm talking to the average doctor. So I will say my experiences have been really positive. And I think a lot of it is chalked up to, frankly, they're living seeing the reality of this. They have tons of anecdotal data. They go in and, like, for example, to back up a little bit, there's a very large hospital medical system here in the United States, and they don't reimburse doctors unless they talk about BMI. So you won't get reimbursed for the appointment unless you talk about BMI, right, from the insurance companies. And so there is this there is this kind of financial business component to some of this. But point being, even though they have to do it, they're watching it not work. They're watching how it leads to delays in care. They're watching how they gave a patient, a talk about BMI and they didn't see them for 2 years. Or they have a patient who came in and they're really serious and now they're potentially manifesting disordered eating signs. So they know, again, when I think about the rooms that I'm in, I'm just giving language to feelings they already have and things they're already seeing every day. I do not think, I think like I have to say, going back to medicine, and I often explain this to people, I think what's interesting is there's kind of two fundamental approaches to medicine that I think doctors and people in general can have. One is where you're holding out for the ideal patient, the highly adherent patient who does every single thing right. You tell them something and they do it immediately, and then they take it on and it becomes incorporated into healthy habits, and they just incorporate everything instantly, right? And then you've got real people. Of course, the ideal patient, that person exists. They're the extreme outlier. But there are some people who they're like, we got to keep holding out for the ideal patient. We got to keep hoping that everyone's going to become the ideal patient. And then there's the other person who says, there are real people. This is how real things happen in real life. This is real patient behavior. And we have to meet those people where they're at. And I think, unfortunately, I think medicine is still highly focused on the ideal patient. And it takes a while to sometimes get to that, what I think I would call harm reduction place, where we're not hoping for ideal behavior in an ideal world. We're meeting people where they're at. And so I think my experience with doctors has been overall very positive, because they're seeing in the real world that, encouraging people to change their body size and use food to change their body and all this stuff, it just doesn't work. And it actually leads to delays in care and worse health outcomes for most people. So yeah, when I'm talking to them, I feel like they I feel like, again, they understand it because they're seeing it. And so giving them that language and giving them alternative questions. Like one of the things I do with doctors is I'm like, the prevailing question right now is, isn't fat bad for you? How can we change fat people? And I'm like, what if we ask a different question? Trying to turn fat people into thin people doesn't tend to work long term. So what is the moral imperative considering that fact? And I think having that reorientation changes the entire trajectory of how you deal with this issue.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good point what you just said there at the end, because I feel like with doctors or people in the medical field, essentially it is that it is turning. Can we turn fat people into thinner people? And there is a lot of appetite suppression in some way. Just switching a little bit now, just moving on to the GLP-1s. Do you remember the first time you started hearing of these GLP-1s, Ozempics?
Yeah, it's like it's concretized in my mind as January 2024.
Wow.
Because I started to get a ton of emails from people trying to get me to take them. So it's like literally so many emails that is
Wow.
burned in my memory, you know?
Just they were trying to get you to take them to sort of prove how good they were, and almost to promote them, or
Yeah, to promote them to my audience, right? They're like, we would love to give them to you for free. We would love to pay you to take them and to document your journey for your audience. It was always like to document your journey for your audience. And I just remember, I mean, again, like I got the first few and my first thought is I'm deleting them because I just literally am like, these are spam. This is just mistake. My thought was like some marketing intern doesn't understand my mission and my purpose and what I do. And they just accidentally just very, very broadly sent this to everybody who does anything related to body. And then after I deleted the first few and they still kept coming, it started to dawn on me that maybe this wasn't an accident and that I was being targeted and that likely my colleagues were being targeted. The people who are in larger bodies and who are pushing for acceptance, not pending weight loss, you know?
yeah. I mean, in terms of the whole weight loss dieting culture, you've been very much a part of it, even just watching it and seeing it rise for how many years. Have you ever seen anything like what is going on with these GLP-1s? I don't think I've seen anything even close to this.
No. I mean, the marketing is so brutally aggressive. And honestly, the ad spend is unprecedented. Just from like a brass tacks numbers sort of perspective, never has diet culture spent this much money on marketing before. So no. And I think the kind of the ubiquity, the inescapability, the sort of sense that we don't care if you don't want to take them. I mean, the sense that you can't opt out. Like I've talked to so many people in my community where, they're trying to opt out hundreds of times, and they can't. And it's this sense of, that inescapability. And there's almost like there's a claustrophobia to it that
Mm.
is unprecedented. Yes.
I think I had one today, and it said the front email just said, "Do you want to be a better version of you?" And normally, as a man, that's like some sort of penis enhancement thing, and it's not. And on this occasion, it was a GLP-1. What is starting to really scare me about them now, because at first it came out of nowhere. Everybody I knew, people who were big, people who weren't big, people who just wanted to stay the same size doing it. Everybody was doing it. And then I don't know if you saw the Netflix, the short Netflix documentary that was I can't remember what it's called, and it talked about it. It talked about what it's doing for just addiction in general. So there's this whole thing now where it's not just food addiction. Oh no. People who had porn addictions, they don't even watch porn anymore. People who were gambling, they don't gamble anymore. And it was all of that. And I was like, wow, this is not just becoming a weight loss thing anymore. This is going to be used for all different types of addiction. And then me and my producer Kaylee was sent a message in about it because, news stories. And it says it is now changing the shape of your brain. And it's like, this is, like you said, 2 years ago, it's not, they haven't done all the studies yet on it, but apparently it's changed. It can change the shape of your brain. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think what people, so I kind of want to break down, I don't think a lot of people understand this. Right. There's this idea that GLP-1s are this miracle drug. What's important, and I specifically want to keep the use case of weight loss, and I'll talk a little bit about the kind of the other addiction stuff. But for the use case of weight loss, there's this idea that it's a miracle drug. And the reality is that GLP-1s work through sort of pumping the brain with a synthetic version of the hormone that tells us that we're full. So when a person feels hungry or full, those are hormones that are being released in the body and telling the brain, I'm hungry, I'm full, right? Normally these are triggered by eating, right? And not, or, being hungry and wanting to eat food. So, GLP-1s work through pumping the brain with that fullness hormone. And what that does is that it creates food restriction. So it creates appetite suppression. So the actual mechanism of action is not the medication, it's the food restriction, which, in my industry is basically dieting. So I often tell people GLP-1s have changed the how, but not the what. They have changed how dieting occurs, but they have not changed how, like the what, which is the food restriction, the caloric restriction. And fundamentally, right, there's a lot of discussion around how we don't have this long-term data on GLP-1s for weight loss. They are these miraculous drugs. I'm like, you're right. We don't have long-term data on GLP-1s for weight loss, but we have over 100 years of data on food restriction and that it really doesn't work long-term for most. And that when it does quote unquote work, it often comes with all these new risks. Like, for example, when someone is food restricting, they are much likelier to develop an eating disorder, which is the second most deadly mental illness, at least in the United States, after opioid addiction.
wow.
And sort of speaking of addiction, I think what people are misunderstanding again when they're calling it a miracle, what is miraculous is how our body operates around food. So when you are not hungry for food, when you lose a desire for food, you lose a desire for other things. And that's what's happening. So like that appetite, that desire is all tied up. When the fullness hormone is overwhelming the brain, you don't want anything. And this is why another risk, and I mean, right, the scientists who invented Ozempic and Wegovy knew this going in. There's an interview I read from them in 2023, I think, from Wired magazine. And they're talking about basically the development of anhedonia. I think that the scientist is something like, yeah, after 2 or 3 years, there likely will come a point where nothing gives the user pleasure and their life might be so overwhelmingly boring that they have to go back to their old life, right? And he basically outright says when we suppress appetite, because food is so connected to the pleasure center of the brain, you create over time a state of anhedonia. And anhedonia is basically the inability to feel pleasure. It is it's the primary symptom of depression. Yeah. So this is what I'm talking about, right? Like, it's a little bit like, I think the saying is like, you steal from Peter to pay Paul. Yeah. I feel like when we're talking about trying to change someone's genetics, right? Because like weight is highly genetically determined. I mean, I think like it's arguable. There's a lot of range here, like anywhere from 40% to 84% or something. I mean, that's a lot of range, but in twin studies, they have found that weight is determined on a level of something like 77, 84, something percent, which is quite high. And twin studies are kind of the gold standard for these kinds of things. So let's just call it, right, like there's the genetic component to being in a larger body. Trying to use food suppression to change genetics, when you say it like that, the math doesn't math, right? But going back to Peter and Paul, like I think what we find again and again and again is when we try to use food suppression to fix somebody, other stuff starts to pop up and it's like a whack-a-mole. Okay, yeah. Sure. Now they're in a smaller body, but now they have anhedonia. They have the symptom of depression. Cool. Now they're in a smaller body. They're in the right body. now they are at risk of anorexia. Okay, awesome. Deadly mental illness. No big deal, right? Like now we've turned this person into a thin person or a thinner person. And all these other things are starting to happen. Like they're getting scurvy, like they're losing muscle mass, they're losing bone density, they're losing their hair. Oh, by the way, when you don't want food, you don't feel thirsty. And you don't produce saliva. So it's like, to me, it's like a nightmare body horror movie unfolding. And everyone's just like, this is great. This is totally normal.
Yeah. I mean, I've spoken to quite a few people, some pro GLP-1 doctors and whatnot, and some not. But that might be the greatest sort of understanding of what it really is, because everything you've said then, especially talking about the symptoms that people are getting, I've been reading. They've talked about the new sort of gaunt face and the new white stuff in the corner of their mouths due to them not really being hungry and then not being thirsty as well. It is very scary. I mean, everybody that I know who is taking it, who is on some sort of Ozempic, Mounjaro thing, they all have this creeping fear in them where they're very happy. Hey, lost a stone, 2 stone, whatever. Hey, these jeans fit, all of this. But I always say to them the same thing. I say, so what, when are you going to come off it? And they all go, I don't know if I can, because once I do, it all goes back and I'm used to, go back to the way that I was, etc. And they're all really scared to come off it. And, one friend I know just said, I think I'm just going to take it until the doctors tell me it's killing me. And I was like, is there no other, And I was like, is there nothing else you can do instead then? Because I don't think people who take the GLP-1s, they know that there's something going on. But in that moment, they're just it's just all about, being thin or thinner. And I think it's really, scary. It's all going to really hit, the shit's really going to hit the fan soon enough.
Yeah. And I think that people don't know that behind the scenes, all these cottage industries and I think what are going to become bigger industries, they all know what's coming. They all know there are going to be unprecedented numbers of cases of anorexia. They all know that there's going to be malnutrition. And I mean, I don't want to disclose names, but basically massive companies, massive international, very, very profitable companies know what's going to happen, and they're all just sitting there creating products waiting for the downstream effects. And again, it goes back to kind of it's not, I think that the argument from a business perspective is it's not my job to change a consumer's mind. The consumer determines what the problem is and then we provide the solution. But I'm just like, well, huge, enormous international conglomerate. Could you maybe tell people why you're making that thing for people who don't have enough vitamins to be upright? And that might be useful for them too. But to your point, I mean, I have to say, it goes back to the stigma piece, right? When you think about weight stigma, I talk about it as 3 dimensions. There's the intrapersonal, which is how much you hate yourself for being in a larger body, how terrified you are of being in a fat body. There's the interpersonal, which is how you interact with other people and socialize, how you're understood based on your body within and among people. And then the third is the societal or the institutional, which is, how easily or not easily can you navigate society based on your body size. And when you think about the person who is, that very enthusiastic GLP-1 user, they often have very high levels of internalized weight stigma. And I'll tell you anecdotally, things I see when someone has very high rates of internalized weight stigma. And I kind of want to asterisk and say, people who are in larger bodies who have high internalized weight stigma have worse health outcomes than people in the same body size category who do not, who have low internalized stigma. So this is an example of how stigma really mediates health. And so I think what's important to understand is when we're talking about the GLP-1 user right now, we're talking about someone who is likelier to have very high internalized weight stigma. And it's like, I think people are thinking fat people, apples to apples. It's not. I feel like it's apples to oranges. And I'll give you an example of like kind of how it impacts cognition and interpretation of events. So I'll have someone who tells me I had to go on a weight loss journey because I gained weight and I could feel my belly when I was bending over to tie my shoes. So I had to go, and I decided that I had to go on a weight loss journey. I was going to do this. I was like, kind of, I mean, what I would call, I'm like, okay, so let's scope this. You were uncomfortable for 30 seconds, perhaps physically and psychologically. And then you decided to go on a very expensive, kind of extreme journey. And I'm like, do you feel like that was a disproportionate response? And the answer is no. And then flip side, we're talking to them now that they're on the journey, they're experiencing the hair loss, the scurvy, loss of equilibrium. Maybe they don't feel thirsty anymore. The saliva is not being made. Their teeth are getting strange. Maybe they don't have as much energy. They're pounding energy drinks. And I'm asking, okay, so let's remember the original initiating event, which is you felt uncomfortable for 30 seconds while tying your shoes. And now you feel nauseous. You can't stand, like you get dizzy when you stand up. You have all these things. But that's completely fine. And they're like, yeah. So I just kind of want to say, like, in real life, I think as you hear this, you know this story.
Yeah.
And I think of, yeah. And you're like, that is the power of stigma. And I think what's interesting is it's like, there is no incentive to protect the fat body. And there is all the incentive to do whatever you have to do to protect and maintain the thin body, including, I think, like this elaborate cognitive dissonance of like, oh, those things are all worth it. Like that 30 seconds that I was uncomfortable before, and now I'm uncomfortable 90% of the time I'm awake. That's worth it though. But those 30 seconds were unacceptable. They were terrible. They were unbearable. But this is all worth it, all bearable,
It's you break it down so well. As you was just talking, I was listening to what you were saying, but then I was thinking, oh my gosh, I've done that so many times.
Yeah.
Like I've seen a photo of me and been like, I don't like the way I look. Right. I'm not eating. I'm only eating at this time and this. And then if I actually thought about it and I went, God, I feel like crap. I just haven't really eaten much today. I've been trying to fast and all this. And if I go, what was the initiating thing? It was the fact you saw a photo of yourself from not an angle that's very good and you didn't like it. I wouldn't do it. I would just look at it and go, oh, forget that. Who cares? The discomfort I'm feeling now, it feels a lot worse. But people really don't think that. I also think as well, we're just going on. I guess it all comes under fat phobia is, like I've had it where I've been big and I've lost weight and I've lost a lot of weight that was uncomfortable. And I've just been I've had the fear in my head that I'm just going to go back to being big. And I always did. But it was the thing that I always hated. And I always knew it just wasn't for me to get, especially to really, really thin like I was before, was the compliments. Because it just made me feel so much worse when somebody would go, have you lost a bit? Oh, you look great. And then in my head, I'm like, oh no, I must look awful when I was, a couple stone heavier or whatnot. And that would always really hit me and it would really hurt me. And again, it's fat phobia, but it is essentially people not realizing, they think they're helping you out in that way.
Yeah, exactly. It goes back to that sort of, overt versus covert fat phobia, that sort of overt versus more subtle. But yeah, I mean, basically like the ideology that being a smaller body is superior, anything that comes from that entrenched belief is fat phobia. Yeah.
Yeah, it is, especially since I've been doing this this podcast and I'm paying more attention to things. You do really see how, even though you talk about your GLP-1s and all the companies who are aware of what is essentially going to come, the media outlets as well, it does feel like you are going up against this giant behemoth of every form of entertainment that is trying to push you into these things. It does feel quite overwhelming. at times.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to compare myself to Ian Malcolm of Jurassic Park. But I feel like I'm like, girl, like when that, like January 2024, I was like, all right, act one, scene one, Jurassic Park. We're
Yeah.
going to do something we know is a bad idea. We have done this 7 other times. Like in the history of diet culture, many more times than the Jurassic Park sort of conundrum. But I'm like, okay, cool. So, I mean, I remember day one, kind of figuring out what GLP-1s are very quickly. I'm like, okay, so they operate through food restriction. Okay, cool. And I'm like, great. So, and now they are proposing medicalized starvation on a level we've never seen before. We know what happens when we starve the body and we don't suppress the hormones. This is going to be so much worse. And also as someone who cares about this from a humanitarian perspective, I'm like, the science isn't there. Okay, great. Science case done. And then I'm like, okay. And then so your value proposition is eugenics. Okay, awesome. So I'm literally like, I'm like, LOL, good luck, right? I think it's like this sense of, I think I literally guffawed out loud when I was looking at the case. I was like, this is bananas. This is complete insanity what's being proposed here. And as someone who kind of, has studied all of this stuff, I'm just like, the math really doesn't math. This is really, really bad. And so I think that Jurassic Park, like, nature finds a way, like, nature finds a way 100% of the time. And when it doesn't, you end up with a horrible, deadly eating disorder. And that's it. And that's the story. And I know how sad it is for us to all have to accept. I mean, I get it. Like, I think as someone who, right, like, it's uncomfortable to sit with the reality. It's uncomfortable to sit with the fact that you just might have this body. I think what's so hard in our culture is like the thing that people are so afraid of is like, you just might have the body you have for the rest of your life. And it's like, that's a foregone conclusion. And I think kind of going back to, I think that the kind of the concept, there's a lot of phraseology here in the United States around like the wellness journey, the weight loss journey. And I'm like, this journey framework is all about, it borrows heavily from the hero's journey. If you've seen Star Wars or any 3-act movie, which is most American cinema, this is the story. The idea is that you're a hero. You are called to adventure. You're taken out of your ordinary life. You transform. You return to your life a completely different person. The problem is that bodies don't work like that. Your body isn't a journey. Healthy habits are not a journey. They're just like, I think about, like, I was just writing a piece on this. I'm like, I'm not on a toothbrushing journey. I just brush my stupid teeth every day, right? Like, it's not a journey. I have to like drink water and like eat varied foods and like get joyful movement. It's not a journey. And like the things that you need to undergo a journey are antithetical to the things you need to just develop healthy habits that likely aren't going to dramatically change how you look, And so when I think about kind of like, I think people's worst fear is that they just have the body that they have. That's a really terrifying thing to me,
Yeah, gosh, you said so many things that really, really hit home with me. It is the framing of it, how they frame it. It's a weight loss journey. This journey, this hero sort of arc that you're on. It's a very good point. I've never looked at it like that. You just I think, again, you get so used to just how they word these things and how they put it out there. You don't realize that actually these are powerful words. It's a weight loss journey that I'm on. It is, yeah.
Well, can I just say, like, going back to journey, like, I think I've been really focusing on like marketing isn't medicine. I'm like, food noise isn't in the diagnostic statistical manual, which is where a doctor would go to diagnose you for something. Food noise is not in there. I think about kind of all the things and all the things that are in the GLP-1 lexicon, like all the language, all the phrases, these were all made by a marketing person, not a doctor, not a scientist. It's kind of this like very successful like lab coat washing that they've done with the marketing where it sounds like this must be written by a doctor. And I'm like, no, this is some dude in an office, like literally wearing a suit who like got a bachelor's degree in marketing, and he's writing the copy for what you're now telling all your friends as if a doctor said it. And I think again, it goes back to the successful manipulation where it's like lab coat washing isn't the same as someone who's wearing a lab coat is telling somebody this, right? I always remember one of the earliest conversations I had with someone who actually co-founded a GLP-1 marketplace, an online marketplace. We were talking and I was like, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the marketing of GLP-1s. And he said, oh, it's scorched earth marketing. And I think scorched earth, right, which is very much like a war-based term, and I think that speaks to the power. And I think what's challenging, right, is marketing arguably it relies heavily on manipulation. It relies on kind of creating a sense of urgency when there isn't one, creating a journey, a hero story, when in actuality, you don't need to be a hero to develop healthy habits that have nothing to do with your body changing sizes. So yeah, I really want to kind of drive home that a lot of this stuff is just marketing. It's deeply psychological. It's divorced from the research that we have around how somebody, changes things like, I don't know, like their A1C if they want to, that you don't need to change your body size to change those things. And I think that GLP-1s have done a massive disservice in taking us ever further, even further than we were before, away from understanding the very unglamorous reality of how healthy habits are developed. And again, I would say a healthy habit is a sustainable habit. Weight loss is not a sustainable behavior. So it just doesn't really go together,
You just reminded me, speaking of the marketing, how just ingrained it is, and how it's genius. Like I found out Mounjaro, which was one of the biggest ones.
Yeah.
The owner creator said, why is it called Mounjaro? Because it's meant to mean Mount Kilimanjaro, as in you're climbing the mountain of weight loss. And my head nearly popped off. That is why it's called Mounjaro. Yeah.
That's bananas.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of the hero's journey, I'm just like, what? Yeah, exactly. Wow.
That is crazy. Yeah. Yeah. They specifically said climbing the mountain of weight loss, Mount Kilimanjaro. That is, yeah. I've spoken to various sort of doctors and people in the medical field about it. I spoke to one doctor who sort of prescribes people, will prescribe people with GLP-1s. And she says, which is a very good point, she says basically the people that she deals with are people who are like sort of severely obese. It's a health issue. They've tried everything. And she said something that really stuck with me as well. She says, when you are a bigger person or a heavier person, you've probably done every diet in the world. People always say that big people don't diet or they don't try and lose weight. Everybody does. They do almost constantly. She says sometimes for a lot of people, I've had this myself, especially at my heaviest weight, I'm just thinking about losing weight every day, all of the time. And it's also like a food noise, but it's like almost in reverse. It's just a constant thing. And she says what's happening with the jabs is they're just not being used in the right way at all, because they're essentially supposed to help somebody who's, is severe health issues due to their weight, lose weight and just get down to something a little bit more manageable. But she actually says what's happening is it's thin people trying to get thinner. And it's also now not being prescribed by any sort of doctor, medical field. I mean, you can get it sometimes in a hairdresser's. And also, when they do get them from the doctor, from her, they get, a whole plan, and everything is explained, and it's this, that, the other, and it's definitely not something for life. That is for sure. Whereas, people who are getting it from the street, there's literally none of that at all. They just get it. You will probably get like severe diarrhea. You'll vomit, all of these things. These people don't know that. And she says it is getting out of hand where you can get it everywhere. And she's pretty sure that it's just going to be a big crisis at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Like I was saying, the Jurassic Park analogy, I'm like, this has never worked out. And I think right now we're looking at an unprecedented level of really not knowing um the cataclysmic things that are coming, right? But all that to say, I mean, respectfully, I want to say to this doctor, right, okay, so I want to look at this patient and look at their whole life, not just the next 2 years, the next 4 years. I want to talk about 15, 20, 30, 40 years. Okay. So this person isn't going to be on this medication for life is what this doctor is saying. All right. So what are the stats? What is the data that we do have telling us that they're going to regain all of that weight very rapidly once they get off of it, and they might gain even more. Okay. Now, whatever metabolic damage they might have had from going on all those diets before is now worse. So now what are we doing to treat this person who is now in a perhaps worse position due to this metabolic damage than they were before? And this is what I see again and again and again when I talk to doctors who prescribe GLP-1s or prescribe weight loss, is I have to ask them. And I know, again, this is a bracing question, but I think it's important to ask, are you medicating this person to alleviate your anxiety or to actually help this person for life? Because I think fundamentally, if you really get down into it, when you think about what happens when you take somebody off a very extreme weight suppressive drug like this, you are not thinking about them in 5 years. And I want to say, I have this phrase that I just feel like is really coming up as we're talking. Diets can't solve problems that diets create. A lot of times what's happening is you have a biologically larger bodied person who was put on a diet very young, and they are now catching up for the rest of their life from the health damage caused by that first diet and the second diet that was there to, fix the stuff from the first diet and the stuff that, what I mean? Like, and so what ends up happening is you end up chasing your tail. And what happens is you've got potentially not all kids in bigger bodies have like a healthy labs, right? But like you have potentially a totally healthy kid who was put on an unhealthy intervention, and now they have the metabolic damage. And then it gets worse and worse and worse every single time they're on a new diet. And GLP-1s are absolutely a diet. I mean, I know it's like so hard to hear, but
I couldn't
just
imagine putting a child on something like that. Could you, like an actual 10-year-old kid putting them on GLP-1s?
I know. And again, it goes back to when I think about the ethics, the humanitarianism, I'm just like, do you think it's ethical to intentionally starve someone, even if they ask for it, even if they consent to it? Because I mean, I think about the Minnesota Starvation Project, which, is a US study on the effects of food restriction, and just again, the cataclysmic impacts of denying people food. And it's spiritual. It's not just physiological. It's psychological. It's deeply connected to the soul, right? To tell somebody your body size merits behavior that is illegal, right? Like you are not allowed to use starvation as an act of war, like as a country. And we are doing this to our own citizens and saying that we're helping them. But can you imagine the psychic damage of saying your body merits us to go outside of the ethics of what we know is correct and right for human behavior because you're fat? And that's what we're saying to children,
Just going back to what you said there about genetics play a huge part in just how tall you are, weight, whatnot. We spoke to somebody who works in bariatric surgery, which obviously is like super extreme. And the one thing that she said that really, really just stuck with me and just I felt so sad was obviously there's different types of bariatric surgery, but the one that most people get now is the sort of the 80% of the stomach like taken out, and then it's just and lose normally about half your weight in a year. It's just insane. And she said to me, she goes, it's not 100% successful. So, and I said, what? She goes, well, and there's about 10% of people who get that full surgery. They actually don't really lose weight. They kind of stay the same. And I couldn't believe that you can have 80% of your stomach, 70, 80% of your stomach taken out, and you won't still lose weight. If there was ever a sort of an argument for genetics more, then it's got to be that. And then just going to what you said as well about the mental health aspect, I can't imagine what the mental health aspects would be like for that poor person.
Yeah, I mean, that sense of, I think there's obviously pain, the physical pain of having a surgery, the pain of recovery, and then to also, feel like you have failed at your goal. And I just, again, I think what's so challenging is in our culture, I feel like most people don't really think that there's an alternative, like that acceptance is not something that you can do. And I don't know. Again, I always have to tell people, I'm like, can you imagine any other marginalized identity that we deal with through not changing our culture and how we think, but asking that person to bend over backwards to experience psychological, physical pain in order to change their genetics, in order to assimilate into this thing that is unethical to begin with. And I just feel like this is what we ask of people in larger bodies all of the time.
Mm.
And so, yeah, the level of suffering is really extreme, you know?
Yeah. Virgie, we've talked about sort of medical aspects, GLP-1 surgeries. Um, where are you at with fitness culture as a whole?
Yeah, again, I sort of feel like in general, when something is focused on weight loss, I'm not on board, right? Like I'm on board with the idea that, okay, if we actually, I think what's ironic, of course, is like, if we didn't have the diet industry, if we didn't have weight loss, we actually, I think, would have much more access to, again, healthy habits. For me, I'm like, the fitness industry, fine, as long as it's not engaging in this toxic competition
Yeah.
weight loss stuff. I'm a believer in weight neutrality. I'm a believer in we as a culture, like we know what humans need to thrive and live a relatively pain-free life. And again, they're not glamorous. Like you need to brush your teeth, you need to drink water, you need to feel safe, you need to get out of stressful situations, or abusive situations. You need to eat enough food and varied amounts of food, right? And varied types of food. Like these are, again, there's no journey, there's no hero,
Mm.
there's no glamour. There's just, they're just doing these things in and out. So for me, I don't have a problem with the adoption of healthy habits. I think that's really, really important. I think, in fact, it is the weight loss industry that gets in the way of developing those things, actually.
That's another really good point. It is. We had somebody on who is a female weightlifter and a personal trainer. And she's a big lady. She's a big lady, and she got a lot of stick on social media by sort of gym bros who were like, "What? You would have her as your personal trainer? She needs to go on a treadmill and all this." Her whole goal isn't about weight loss. It's strength. She looks like she lifts more than me. She's like a power lifter. I think, well, I'm not going to say all, but a lot of the older gym people understand that everybody's got different goals. Some people's goals aren't even to lift weights in the gym. It's more just to go and just do something, be active in some way. I think a lot of the weight loss stuff it's definitely getting better than when it was, because I think now people just appreciate lifting and just doing something a bit more active. But yeah, you are definitely right. We'd be a lot further, I think, if the weight loss thing wasn't pushed as much, because that was always what it was about, wasn't it? For years with the gym, why are you going to the gym for? I'm just going because I want to feel stronger. Why? You're not lifting, you're not trying to lose weight. Get on the scales and all that. It is changing a little bit. What would you say to somebody, and you might have touched on it earlier, who feels like they're pressured into going to the gym almost to lose weight?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, right. Again, I have to talk about it goes back to the marketing and the hero's journey, right? It's like I think for me, I'm like, we have this ideal version of what right living looks like, what our body is supposed to look like, where we're supposed to go, what we're supposed to wear, what exact routines. At the end of the day, for me, I'm like, listen, do the thing that is activity, movement focused, that works for you. If you hate being inside while you're moving your body, then have an outdoor practice. If you hate being outside when you're moving your body, have an indoor practice. If you love dancing, dance. If you hate lifting weights, don't lift weights. What boggles my mind again and again is like how all these industries that are allegedly focused on health promotion just create more and more barriers to that very thing. Like if your movement is that you like to dance in your living room in your underwear, listening to Kylie Minogue or whatever, that's your movement. And it costs whatever, like none dollars. You don't need special gear or whatever. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm like, what works for you? And I feel like there's this amazing quote. I love reading about behavioral scientists right now and habit forming and what actually forms a habit. So it turns out that habit forming tends to fail when we have really lofty goals that are relied on like massive visible transformation. And one of these famous behavioral scientists in the US kind of points out, we do not rise to our goals, we fall to our systems. So the lofty goal, all that stuff, that's going to set you up for failure. It's looking at the life you have, what works for you now, and figuring out how you want to have these healthy habits go into that life. And again, for me, a healthy habit by its very nature is going to be weight neutral, because weight neutrality is sustainable. Because if you're measuring your physical movement habit by your body changing, it's just, again, it's going to create a failure loop. At the end of the day, it's like using metrics of like, how do I feel? You know, do I have a little more strength? Like when I do this thing, do I feel better? Do I have a little more energy? And these things happen slowly. I mean, going back to this bariatric example where it's like losing half of your body weight in 1 year is objectively scientifically terrible. And it goes back to, it's like that blank check that fat phobia writes for us in medicine and in society, where it's like, whatever you have to do to not be fat, just do it. You got a blank check, everybody. And it's just, I think this creates this really horrible situation. The ironic, or perhaps ironic thing, again, when you know kind of the science and all the stuff, right? It's not ironic, but I'm like, weight loss, diet industry, all these, they have neither created a society full of healthy people nor a society full of thin people. These are the two things you guys keep saying you're delivering. These are the two things you are not giving. And so for me, I'm like, the math isn't mathing on that. That was a long answer, but like fundamentally, yeah, I'm a fan of, you know, go to the gym if you want to. You can have a movement practice anywhere that you are and do something that you love.
Virgie, thank you so much. Honestly, I think you've been my favorite guest. I've learned so much. I've been in the field. I've been in my own feels about certain things that you've said. Honestly, this has been truly brilliant. Before I let you go, where can the people find you on any social media, books, anything at all that they can come and see you and check you out?
Yeah, I'm really active on Substack, so virgietovar.substack.com. And I have my own podcast. It's about GLP-1s, fundamentally looking at the other side of the coverage, which is, you know, asking critical questions about GLP-1s. And it's called GLP-1 True Serum. It's on Spotify. If you want to follow me on Instagram, at Virgie Tovar also.
Thank you so much, Virgie.
Yeah, such a pleasure.